Hello, 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 Reza. How are you?
Good. Shay, how are you doing?
I am good today. It is another episode of Future Forward.
Yeah, we have a very interesting one today. But before we jump into it, we're going to tell our listeners a little bit about Future Forward. This is a podcast that is an extension of a conversation that Shay and I have been having for many years. We explore sustainable cities and thriving communities by looking at the history of a particular topic. We take a slice of a particular topic, explore it through the lens of history, what's going on in the present, and then providing some strategic foresight for where it's going. And we always say we're not experts. We are just curious about how we can effect this type of change in the world. And we want our listeners to help us by, if you're an expert on a particular episode, please give us your feedback. If you're just curious about something that we should explore, please let us know as well. We have a segment right at the end of our episode that's called Mailbag, where we share what we've heard from our listeners and want to just bring you all into this discussion, into this conversation that we're having. So Shay, this episode is a very interesting one because it's our second episode with an expert.
Yes.
And I found it fascinating. You had this conversation with him. So Jay, tell us a little bit about who we're talking to and what we're learning.
Yes. So thanks for the intro, Reza. Lincoln Bleveans is the expert we have on today. And Lincoln is the Executive Director of Sustainability and Energy Management at Stanford University. The cool, fun part about his job is that he works both in the actual implementation of sustainability and energy management initiatives at Stanford University, which is really a mini city in Palo Alto, but also works on some of the research side. What are the ways of just building and shaping our cities so that they can be sustainable? So he's got this phenomenal um, and unique perspective on the implementation of ideas and the creation of ideas. And Lincoln and I met on a stage at a conference. Actually, we were both presenting at one of the energy conferences a few years ago. And as our listeners will get to experience, I really enjoyed the way he thinks.
Yeah.
And he said the same thing about me. So we stayed connected, and he's listening to the podcast. He's a frequent listener and reached out because he's working on a book, Climate Plus, it's called. And as I share during the interview, like, oh man, you have to come on and share this really, I think, interesting perspective on the climate conversation that gets honestly a bit too political for my taste,
Yeah.
but he brings a unique lens on it, and this was one of the things we wanted to make sure we brought to our listeners.
Fantastic. So
Yeah.
without further ado,
Welcome, Lincoln.
Thank you very much. I am thrilled to be here.
Fantastic. We tend to focus on Future Forward on just talking about cities, the history of cities, where we are today, and strategic foresights about the future that we can glean from how we've behaved in the past. And as I was reading the proposal for Climate Plus, I was like, this, even the format is set in the way we tend to lay out the podcast episode. So I'm really excited to have you on here. But we'll start from you, Lincoln. What is the story? How did you get to this point?
Oh boy, that is I often think of it as a roller coaster in the dark. Uh, I am, I am I've got a very unique background. And a very unconventional background, I think, for
Mm,
the businesses that I've been in. I started out as a foreign language major at a
mm,
liberal arts college, taught English in Japan in junior high schools, and went to law school because I didn't know what else to do and realized I was going to be a terrible lawyer, and then jumped into a startup
mm,
and doing mutual funds in emerging markets and learned sort of finance by osmosis and accounting by osmosis and capital markets by osmosis. And then I learned about the independent power business, and this is back in the 90s when it was really going strong. And I thought, I've never seen a power plant in my life, but this looks really, really cool. And so I got some very, very fortunate breaks, a lot of networking that led to those breaks, and jumped in with both feet. And within a couple of days of starting a job at a utility affiliate, I was in rural China kicking tires on power plants. And it's been a wonderful roller coaster since, really around the world and across the value chain in the power industry. Everything from utilities to venture capital to private equity to mergers and acquisitions, of course, power project development, project finance, and even some workouts, equity side workouts along the way of very, very troubled projects. And now, really bringing that all together, combined with a lot of water experience and sustainability experience at Stanford. And at Stanford, I've got a really cool job. I run sustainability, utilities, and infrastructure for the research university slash small full service city that is Stanford University. So really, it's amazing. It's been a roller coaster in the dark, but it's landed me in a very, very cool place.
Cool place. I 100% agree. As and I have mentioned on this show that utilities and the future is a mini grid, micro grid future in the utility space, and you're literally living that, because that is what the campus at a university like Stanford is. It's a beautiful place with all the infrastructure required to run almost like its own city. And I can imagine, having worked at a power station, I did as well at some point in my career, you bring some of that system knowledge, because it is a system, you bring it to your work daily. And I was wondering, does that sort of feed into the book Climate Plus?
It's the book to be. And if there are any agents out there, or publishers, I'm the only Lincoln Bleveans out there. Give me a call. I'd love to talk to you.
I'm pretty sure you'll get this book published, Lincoln. I'm pretty certain. Yeah.
Yeah, it's at the proposal stage, but it's something I've been thinking about for a long time, because the way I've come to see the world, why I call it Climate Plus, is because obviously climate change is a step function in the human reality. Economies go up and down, markets go up and down, political systems go up and down. But climate change is a step change. It's almost like a ratchet wrench. It moves one way, it never moves back. So that's the big thing. But around that, we have pollution, air, water, soil. When I was a kid, we always used to say the solution to pollution is dilution. And in the 1970s, that seemed like a realistic thing to assume. And what we've realized now is that our planet has hit its limit, whether it's plastics in the ocean or carbon or other, the ozone layer, other things going on in air, soil, and water. But then you also add endemic, which is frankly an outcome of the stresses that we're putting the system under. You add all of the adaptation and resilience and justice aspects of climate change. In other words, how do we deal with rising sea levels? How do we deal with the migrations that are going to result from rising sea levels? The fact that parts of, for example, East Africa, there are parts of the Horn of Africa that are becoming uninhabitable because of temperature rises. Not just uncomfortable, but uninhabitable. And those people need to go somewhere, and we need to find a greater humanity in accepting that and creating a new world that reflects the reality and hopefully doesn't result in conflict over limited resources. So there are a lot of things there as I look at that challenge, which is this, a wicked it's a wicked problem of wicked problems.
Yes.
It's mind-boggling.
Yes.
I look at that and I see so many opportunities for literally everybody,
Mm.
whether you are an engineer or a scientist, or you are a communicator, a writer, a farmer, somebody who drives a truck, somebody who runs a market or has a place in the supply chain. There are opportunities for each one of us, and each one of us being who we are and doing what we do best, what I call a superpower.
Mm.
And so the book is going to be framed, I have to use the future tense, is
Please.
going to be framed in the perspective of how do we understand this? How do we get our mind around it as a system of systems problem? But then how do we each find agency and opportunity? Each one, whether we're in the global north or global south or global east or global west, how do we each find agency and opportunity, making our world, our habitat, a better place?
No, thank you so much for sharing that. We don't even have to look too far. I live in Austin, Texas, and we have had what is going on the second week. We're almost at the end of the second week of 100-degree days. I think this past Wednesday, it was about 105, but it felt like 116 or so is what was reported. So we don't even have to look too far. It is becoming a problem in a lot of places that if we don't, as you're suggesting, start to reframe things and think about the economy in a different way, which is one of the things you suggest in your book, we will really struggle to avoid conflict. I share that, I agree with you, but then at the same time, you and I work in industry and there is a clear backlash against one of the current measures of how we're doing in our fight against the climate, which is sort of these ESG measures we use. So why Climate Plus, even in the midst of all the backlash that we seem to be seeing? Yeah.
Yeah, it's the way I think about it, and this is maybe my Midwestern optimism coming back, but to me, it's especially now.
Mm.
ESG is just the latest version in my mind. I mean, we had CSR, we had triple bottom line, we've had all sorts of different ways to slice and dice and talk about this. Ultimately, it's just another version of trying to value the things that have always been externalities before.
Mm. Mm.
So it's trying to value the externalities around fossil fuel use. It's trying to value the externalities around pollution and climate justice, environmental justice. Oh my God, all over the world. So ESG is just the latest attempt to value that. And I think that there are many people in the world who see what's happening, but also see their livelihood, see their way of life, their expectations for their life
Mm.
challenged by internalizing those externalities. In other words,
Mm.
if a gallon of gas would include the life cycle impact, the life cycle costs of that gallon of gas, we're in a world of hurt when it comes to, at least in America, one of our favorite things to do, which is drive around in our internal combustion cars, and I'm still one of them. So I think there's a lot of fear there, not so much from the perspective of I don't believe this is happening. I think that view is waning.
It's
What
gone,
I'm
yeah.
seeing is more of a kind of gut practical fear that I completely understand that if we start valuing these externalities, internalizing them, and then that is going to massively reprice pretty much everything we do in our world, in our lives. And I think people are really, really fearful of that, really anxious about that. And I get it.
Yeah.
I'm getting on a plane to go to Europe in a week and a half. imagine how much that ticket would cost if all those externalities were
Or factored
internalized.
in. Yeah. No, thanks so much for that. I like that it in the midst of the backlash, you see the opportunity. That optimism is what we all need for sure. We'll switch over quickly to one of the indicative stories you share in the proposal for the book, and it is I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Gadi Sugdub.
I think that was my guess too. I
Yeah,
don't.
and if you don't mind sharing the story, because my understanding is it's a tiny island in the Caribbean Sea, part of the San Blas archipelago. So I'll stop there because you share a little bit more, because it is indicative. The story is indicative of how cities that are economically and ecologically dependent on bodies of water,
Yeah,
what we need to start worrying about for our cities and what lessons we can learn from there.
yeah. It's an island. It's part of Panama, and it's an island of a few hundred people that's been, home for those families for centuries, and a ways off the coast. And they are seeing sea level rise firsthand. And so it's clearly it's taking away real estate, obviously, but and that's the direct and kind of obvious impact, but it's also creating a very, very important impact on their utility systems.
Mm,
So their water system and their civil infrastructure
mm,
is getting overwhelmed by sea level rise and the impact of the sea level rise. And so, what the Panamanian government has done and is doing, I think, is moving those populations to the mainland.
mm.
There are certain people who are holding out. Of course, some people will stay there until it's just a square meter of land and a flag. But um, the it's a really interesting example of real impact and real immediate right now impact. Of course, sea level rise one place is sea level rise everywhere. It's all one big body of water.
Yeah,
But often the coastlines are more and the communities are more naturally protected, whether it's by, bluffs or any sort of elevation. Here, they've actually moved these populations, these families, and their need for employment and their need for education and their need for housing to the mainland, and in a very proactive way. And to me, which is very, very impressive, humans tend to be a very reactive
true.
species, often for a detriment. But here's the Panamanian government moving them in a very proactive way and building the housing, building the education, finding ways to translate employment opportunity on the island to employment opportunity on the mainland. And as far as I know, and I would, if I get a big advance on the book, that's my first trip is to go down there. I
Mm,
love Panama anyway. I did a power
mm.
project out there many years ago.
Wow,
The food is amazing. It's just a big thing for me. The
absolutely.
but apparently, what's happening is kind of a best case scenario,
Mm,
and that is that these people are being moved to a place where obviously other people are already there and
yeah,
already. But as far as the news reports go, it is a relatively frictionless move. You're not getting this sort of resource conflict
nice.
around real estate, around spots in the local schools, et cetera, around the utility systems that all of a sudden have to deal with a lot more people.
Additional
So
people.
it's kind of a best case scenario. It's also a microcosm of the sort of things that are going to be already happening in places like Bangladesh.
Mm,
Um, Places, of course, the South Pacific island nations, this is
yeah,
very real. This is a clear and present thing right now.
yeah.
Um, so to me, it's a really interesting microcosm. And I think those sorts of examples, especially, both if they go well, we learn a lot. If they go poorly, we learn a lot.
True.
Um, And those are the things that we need to start studying and really start to have a dialogue, a public dialogue about this inevitability. And how are we going to not let, this is an awkward sentence, I'm sorry. How
Go
are
for
we
it.
going to avoid losing our humanity in the midst of climate change?
Yeah.
And that, to me, is the question for us as a species.
Yeah.
How do we, we're losing our habitat. We got to fix that. But ultimately, how do we keep our humanity in the
In the
face of
midst of
these
all this.
incredible changes?
Reza, my co-host on this podcast, that is the theme of his work. He constantly points to the need for community, the remembrance, and the sort of the active utilization of our humanity to deal with all the challenges we're facing. And I believe he shared a few episodes ago about how it has been confirmed that in times of disaster in cities, which is the sort of focus of our podcast, the communities that are like bound together by the shared humanity and express that are the ones that thrive after the disaster. And there's no doubt that you're hitting on like the core question we need to start answering now, hand in hand with adaptation and mitigation, where we can still make that happen. And so I'm so glad you're framing it through that lens of the humanity. Flip it though, and one of the things you mentioned is the advancement of technology and AI being the hype machine technology that we continue to shout about right now. How much humanity is in that as we use it to try and address some of the effects of climate change, or figure out what our disaster or emergency or recovery plans will be? Because I believe it can help with those things. Yeah.
I'm convinced it can. I actually think,
Yeah.
there's the old, I don't know how many thousands of year old saying, cometh the hour, cometh the man. Somebody famous said that. I can't remember
Yeah.
who. But in this case, I think I have a very strong feeling that this is, cometh the challenge, cometh the solutions. And I think AI is not the solution, but I think it's a very, very important solution. I think it is it's part of the starting five on the basketball team of climate solutions. I mean, it's going to be one of the stars, if not the star. AI, going back to this wicked problem, and wicked very much in the scientific sense of the word. So,
Yeah.
every way you look at it, it looks different. It's very difficult to tell if it's been solved. And then it has these feedback loops that go on forever. We have in climate change kind of the definitional wicked problem, in and of itself. And then you add all these other things around it, including politics, including these rising generations who won't take no or even slow for an answer. You add that all together and you get this kind of wicked problem of wicked problems, and with a complexity that is simply, at least beyond the way beyond the capacity of my brain. It's a little bit like, I live near the Pacific Ocean, and I walk down to the beach and I try to look at the ocean, and the size of it is just, it's like the Grand Canyon. I just can't get, my brain just can't process it. And I think the challenges that we have here are the same in that, but when you look at AI, cometh the disaster, cometh the challenge, cometh the technology. AI is designed to find patterns within these literally mind-boggling data sets. and find options and help us find priorities and help us find those feedback loops. Everything we do is a compromise, especially in the energy business. Everything we do is a compromise. And we're going to have to compromise and compromise and compromise going forward. But we have to look at those compromises, again, with those externalities internalized. We have to have our eyes wide open, and we have to understand those and have that dialogue, migration being just one of them. We have to have that dialogue around those compromises. And I think AI is going to be a really, really helpful tool, if not the star tool, in helping us understand what the feedback loops are, what we're not looking at, what patterns we're not seeing, and perhaps what patterns we think we're seeing and we're actually, are just anecdotal, or we're stating their importance.
Interpreting it wrong, yeah.
Yeah. But then, on the other side of it is technology is no good unless you have changed behavior on the human side. I like to tell the story of this house that we bought a couple of years ago, and it came with Nest thermostats. And I'm the energy geek in the family. Everybody else rolls their eyes, but I'm the energy geek, and I'm like, oh my God, we can save money. We can save, we can help with carbon. We can do all these great things. And what does the rest of my family do? They treat it like a thermostat from 50 years ago. They turn it on, they turn it off. Oh, it's too hot, I'll turn it down. It's too cold, I'll turn it up. And so it's a beautiful machine, but it's wasted. It's absolutely wasted without a change in behavior, without some sort of change management process that gets us to, I want to change my behavior in reaction to this technology. Then the technology is worthless. It's literally I'll take a picture of it. It's literally the Nest thermostat on my wall. And I see that just to geek out on energy a little bit, I see that with electric vehicles. When we charge our electric vehicles, that puts a very heavy load on our electric system. For 100 years, we have been taught that the best time to do anything like that, wash your dishes, dry your clothes, is in the middle of the night. And that the last time you want to do that is in the middle of the day. And now, with solar penetration, especially in a place like California, we actually have to turn that entirely on its head and say it's time for you to charge your EV is in the middle of a bright sunny afternoon on a Sunday. And that is because that's what the grid needs actually at that point. That's when prices are low or negative. That's when the grid is actually has to curtail solar to maintain stability. And whereas at night, that's when a lot of those remaining baseload fossil plants are kicking on.
Have to kick on.
And that's the high carbon time. So that's another example of how, yes, we get the technology, but we only really get the big benefit, both economically for ourselves, if you have time of use rates, but also for the climate, if you do exactly the opposite of what you've been taught and your parents have been taught, and your grandparents and your great-grandparents have been taught. So it's that duality. This is fascinating to me, that duality between technology innovation and behavior innovation. That has to go with it.
That is so well said. And the phrase I discovered is attributed to come at the man, come at the hour, is attributed to a bowler, an English bowler, Chris Gladwin, as his team was taking on the South Africans in some competition in 1948 or something. So I do think with your work on this book, it does feel the same. You're an expert in this space, without a doubt, and the knowledge you have needs to be shared with everyone near and far when the book does eventually get sold and published. And so come at the man, come at the hour, come at the man who will educate us about what we need to do in what is a climate plus future.
Yeah, I'm very hopeful. I see the challenge. I think we've spent so much ink has been spilled and so much talking has been done about the the horror side of all of this, and I think we've all I don't dismiss that, but I think what we need now, having built that foundation of knowledge, we now need to build the the opportunities and the agency and the solutions on top of that. That's the mode we're in. We're going from from admiring the problem, which is indispensable. We can't. I mean, that's absolutely fundamental. But now, in my mind, and maybe it's being in Silicon Valley too, and being at Stanford, it feels like solution time. And that's exciting to me.
Fantastic, Lincoln. Thank you so much. For any of our listeners, new or old, who might know who can give Lincoln a fat book advance, or any publishers who might be listening to this, reach out to him and give him a fat book advance. How can people reach you, Lincoln?
The easiest way is on LinkedIn. I am the only Lincoln Bleveans I've ever run into. So
awesome.
If you type in, and my last name's spelled kind of funny. Shay and I were talking about that before we started recording. But find me on LinkedIn. That's the absolute easiest way. I just you can tell I love talking about this stuff. And
that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Lincoln. And to our listeners, please share far and wide. Reach out if you have any comments on this episode. And as always, thanks for listening. Be kind to one another. Bye.
So Shane, that was very interesting. I found that a fascinating discussion. I learned a lot. I really appreciate his perspective. Thank you for bringing him on to Future Forward and sharing him with our listeners. I had two things that struck me hearing him speak. One was, I was so taken by his focus on humanity. And that's something that we have talked a lot about, in Future Forward, about how important the community and the humans that are part of these systems are.
Yes.
And the thing that struck me was, when he mentioned about how, the Horn of East Africa just now being uninhabitable with, climate, being so hot, how migration is going to become a problem. And it reminded me of a book by Mohsen Hamid called East West. Both of you and I have read it.
One of the books that we absolutely love. Yeah.
Sometimes fiction brings a lens onto the world with its unique way. And his book was a little fantastical where, people that wanted to leave a particular place could go through this portal, this door, and that, that portal or door was your phone into another place, and all the chaos that ensued through that migration. And I believe that that was a call by him for us to listen to how difficult migration can be. There are parts of the world that are still going to be all right with climate change, but they're going to see these other people that want to come there as the other. It's us versus them. And with all the work that we're doing and all the talk that we have about climate change, carbon reduction, electrification of our transportation fleets, et cetera, I hear very little discussion about like the humans that are part of it. What happens to those humans that can't live in those places? And how do we, in this very fraught global political climate, address it? The second thing that struck me from this episode, he touched on AI and how it can be a solution to helping us with climate change. And it made me curious. So I do AI in my day job, but not focused on climate change. And I would love if any of our listeners that does know someone that's working on AI to address climate change, if you could connect us with them so that we can bring that expert and have a discussion about like where AI can actually make a difference with
Yeah.
the challenges that we face. So piqued my interest. I was really interested, and I am now more curious to learn. I want to do what we always do at the end of our episode, which is a call to action. And this call to
Yes.
action is read the book East West. And if you don't, just understand what's happening with migrants in your community. Where are they
Yes.
coming from? Who is supporting them? Why are they coming? And what impact is it having on your city?
Yes.
Is your city welcoming them? Do they have the support system that they need? So that's just a sort of a point to pay attention to.
That's great.
Yeah. So mailbag this week, I had a mailbag from my friend Carolyn. She really enjoyed the episode that we did on third places. And she said, the same week that she listened to the episode, she came across two other articles, one from our local TV station KXAN and another article from some other place that was touching on third places. And so she was really struck by, the coincidence of it. And one of the takeaways from these other articles was that stadiums have become a third place. They're a place that is a place where a community can come together without it being political. Like it's not religious, it's not political, and so a community can come together and just cheer their fans on.
Yes.
They cheer their team on because they're fans. Their identity is attached to the team as opposed to something else, and so they explore this other identity. And I mentioned that in a previous episode about like Austin FC and what a welcoming third place it is,
Space,
and
yeah.
where you can really explore your identity as an Austinite that cares about that team. And so, thank you, Carolyn. It gave us an idea for a future episode that we're going to do on cities and sports and the impact that it has. The positives and the negatives that come from it. So, thank you.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I'm excited for that one. And
Yeah.
a similar mailbag came from a good friend from business school for me, Rose. And Rose now lives in Charlotte with her family, but she used to live in San Francisco. And in her comments, which she made via LinkedIn and via text, they had the spaces to go to in California, but have struggled to find those in Charlotte.
Mm.
And consequently, they've joined a synagogue to experience the belonging that comes from third places. And she also shared an article where the US Surgeon General had talked about the value of third spaces as one of the opportunities to help struggling parents in cities. And Rose is that. Rose has two little kids. And it does feel like, to your point, and I'm glad we're going to do another episode on sports in cities. The third space, third place idea is one that needs a lot more conversation because it feels like a critical one
Yeah.
for just the identity we all seek, separate from the ones we wake up every day having, which is in our homes and at work.
Yeah. That's fantastic. I love these mailbags.
They're
I
great.
just feel so gratified that our listeners care about the topics that we're talking about and giving us ideas and giving us their feedback. Please keep it coming. Obviously, like and subscribe, rate and review. Those things actually help the algorithm, but others find us as well. And the most important thing that we always say is share it with someone that that you care about, that would be interested in this. This is how we grow our community of people that care about the future of cities and communities.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for listening. And till next time, bye.
Bye, everyone.